so this video is going to be a little different because I'm going to show you some animation that I did back in the day. And I just want to talk a little bit about the studio that I worked with and this transitional period between Hollywood and coming out here on my own. And there's reasons for it. It's because right now there's some really exciting things happening with the studio that I'm talking about and the studio that I did this animation for. So a lot of people have wondered how I made this transition from Hollywood to moving away, selling my house, quitting Hollywood, not taking any more studio jobs, and just being able to make a living doing my comics. And there's a whole pile of factors in this, but one I want to really highlight right now is this company called The Bible Project, started by John Collins and Tim Mackey. Now, when I was in DreamWorks, I had this realization one day driving home from work, and I was praying and I was kind of arguing with God, and I felt like God was saying, you need to leave not only DreamWorks, but you need to leave LA. You need to leave Hollywood, California. You need to stop being a part of the industry. And there was even things that led up to that, but I really felt like it was clear. And I was struggling because I needed to tell my wife, like, how would I explain this to my wife? She grew up here. And I was arguing with God saying, well, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to leave this? I've built up 20 years of experience here and connections. And I just throw that away, just leave it. Like, where am I supposed to go? And immediately the thought crossed my mind, move to Idaho. My parents live there. They're retired. Cost of living there is cheaper. I could sell the house. I could move there easily. There's a lot of things to figure out, but all these things kind of just made sense all of a sudden, like within an instant. And so I was like, okay, great. I need to tell my wife about this and actually have this conversation with her. If I can convince her, then maybe that's right. I don't know. This is a huge life-changing event. So I went home and I was like, I need to sleep on this for like a week before I tell my wife. But I just could hardly even look at her when I came home. It was so difficult to be around her because I knew I had to tell her. I had to tell her this thing that I really felt like God was telling me to do, which meant uprooting everything just completely. I don't remember how long it took me, but finally I was just like, I have to tell you something. I can't not tell you what I'm thinking. So I explained it. I explained my reasoning. I explained why. I explained that I felt like this is what God put on my heart to do. I was like, I don't know how it's going to work, but this is what I think we need to do. And she actually said, all your points make absolute sense. But we can't just do it tomorrow. Let's give it some time. Let's try to plan it. Let's give ourselves like a time frame where we can actually get this done. So I was like, okay, cool. Wow, she actually is on board. Let's let this sink in, and let's have conversations every now and then about it, and let's start moving this direction. Now, I was still in the middle of a contract at DreamWorks. I had, I think, about 6 months left on it at that time, and I was going to be right in the middle of a movie, Kung Fu Panda 3, when the contract ended. And so I was pretty sure that DreamWorks would want another contract with me, another 3-year contract. But regardless, I started praying about it, and I was like, God, if you want me to do this, show me how this is supposed to happen, because I have no idea how this is going to work. There's too many factors into this that are confusing to me, and I don't know. For me to make those steps, I need doors to open up for me to make those steps, to just transition to outside of California and get jobs outside of the industry. I don't know where those are going to come from. And so meanwhile, I was working at DreamWorks, and I would watch a lot of YouTube lectures and videos and stuff while I was working at DreamWorks. And I stumbled across this brand new channel called The Bible Project. And they had put out 2 videos. Okay, their first one was a theme video on heaven and earth, and their second one was a video on the first half of Genesis. And I watched it, and I was completely mesmerized by these guys' video and the way they put it together, the way that they communicated these ideas. They had like 15,000 subscribers. I don't know, a couple thousand. I don't remember, but it was really small. And I was like, this is kind of exactly what I'm thinking. Like this kind of stuff is what I would kind of like to do. I've done a lot of After Effects. I could do these videos completely by myself. I could do these for them. Maybe they would hire me, And so my mind just exploded with ideas, and I went to their website, and they're completely funded by donors, and so I set myself up to donate to them regularly, like once a week or once a month or something like that, because I just really loved what they were doing. And as soon as I did that, one of the guys, John Collins, emailed me, and he's like, "Hey, thanks for the donation. I was just wondering where you heard from us, where you heard about us." I emailed him back, and I said I stumbled across it on YouTube, and I really liked it. And in fact, this is the kind of stuff I used to do for studios here in LA, and I work at DreamWorks now, and I've done After Effects for DreamWorks, and I would love to help out if I'd love to help out more than monetarily. I just can't right now because I'm working full time. And he's like, "Well, that's cool, thanks for helping us, and let's keep in touch." I don't know how much time had passed, but it might have been a couple of weeks, but he emailed me and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in town. Can I come and visit you and hang out with you at DreamWorks for a little bit and just see what you work on?" He came and we met for lunch, and he showed me some ideas that they were working on at the Bible Project. And he just straight up was like, "How can we get you to quit your job at DreamWorks and to come work for us?" And I was like, "Well, you guys are a nonprofit. I need a certain wage." He's like, "No, we're nonprofit, but we pay living wages to people so that they can afford it. I mean, we're donation funded, but we want to pay the artist their rate. So what would your rate be?" And I actually gave him a lower rate than what I required for other jobs. And I was like, "Look, I would love to do this, but I can't. I got to at least wait till my contract's done. I don't want to break this contract with DreamWorks, but it's going to be up in about 4 or 6 months or whatever." And so he's like, okay. I won't put any more pressure on you. But we kept communicating. And when the time came for my contract to expire or be renewed, I had this conversation with DreamWorks. I was like, "Look, I'm not going to renew it." And they're like, "Kung Fu Panda 3 is only halfway done." I was like, "Look, I got to go. I'm decided I'm going to move. I'm going to move out of LA. I'm going to do something else." Before it was over, I contacted John again. And I was like, "Look, my contract's ending. I would love to work with you guys. We need to put our house on the market. But if you can guarantee that I have a job with you guys and it's a certain rate, then I can cover my bills here in LA, and it can help me during this transitional period because I'm moving to Idaho. That's the plan." And he's like, "Great, okay." And I was like, "What I'd really love to do is just take on a video, just do a video all by myself for you guys as much as I can." I think we agreed to that pretty quickly. Immediately after my last days at DreamWorks, I flew out to Oregon, and I worked with them for 2 days. I stayed at John's house and worked with him in the studio, worked in a room with John and Tim as they were going over Tim's script, and we were all just throwing down storyboards. It was just super fun, like exactly what you hear on their podcast, which I'll mention later. So we were going over the script. They had the script called Holiness. I was drawing storyboards. We were drawing them on the dry erase board, and then we took pictures of all those. And meanwhile, just so you know, this is in between Sithra 1 and 2. So I'd already finished Sithra 1, and I was preparing to start working on Sithra 2. So anyway, we worked on this thing. I started storyboarding it. I started cleaning up the storyboards, and then I was going to come back to LA, to my house, and just work on this video. And that's what you see here. This is me working from my home office in LA, just animating this sequence of the seraphim, trying to get their wings animating right. This was in Flash. I designed it in Photoshop. I put it into Flash then and animated it. And then I also brought it into After Effects and finished all the animation in After Effects. So almost single-handedly, I animated this whole Holiness video over the course of, I think it was 2 months. Towards the end, I realized there were certain parts I couldn't probably do, and so I told John and Tim, and they gave a couple scenes. The very opening scene with all the space stuff they gave to another guy, really talented animator. And then everything else I pretty much finished on my own, except for the sound design. I had nothing to do with the sound design. So anyway, turned it in, and it went live on their website about 3 years ago. Here's a link to it. It actually has 1.6 million views now. Dang. And so I'd like to show it to you. If you haven't seen it, enjoy. If you have seen it, then just skip forward and I'll keep talking after the video's done.
You've probably heard the word holy before, or at least sang it in a church song once or twice. And for most people, this idea is really just connected to being a morally good person. So God is holy because he's morally perfect.
Yeah, that is part of it. But in the Bible, the idea of holiness is even bigger and more rich. What it's really describing is how God is the creative force behind the whole universe. He's the one and only being with the power to make a world full of such beauty and life. And so all these abilities, they make God utterly unique, which is the meaning of the word holy. So a helpful way to think about God's holiness is by using the sun as a metaphor. The sun is unique, at least within our solar system, and it's really powerful. It's the source of all this beautiful life on our planet. And so you could say that the sun is holy. And you can actually take this metaphor even further in that the whole area around the sun is also holy.
Yeah, because the closer you get to the sun, the more intense it gets.
Yeah, exactly. So that very power and goodness that generates all this life is also dangerous. I mean, the sun, if you get too close, will annihilate you. And in the same way, there's this paradox at the heart of God's own holiness, because if you're impure, his presence is dangerous to you. And not because it's bad, but because it's so good. And so the first time we see this paradox of God's holiness, it's in the story of Moses and the burning bush.
So God tells Moses to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. And Moses covers his face in fear, and God says, hey, don't come any closer. It's intense.
And it's actually that intensity of God's holiness that's explored even more in the stories about Israel's temple, which was the main place where God's holy presence was located. And at the center of the temple was this room called the Most Holy Place, this the hot spot of God's presence. And whether you're an Israelite living in the land around the temple or a priest working right in the temple, you're in proximity to God's holy presence, which is dangerous.
Yeah, this is a problem. So how's it supposed to work?
Well, in the Bible, the solution is that you need to become pure.
So like being morally pure.
Yeah, and that's easy enough to understand. But the Bible spends a lot of time talking about another kind of purity, being ritually pure, which is a state where you separate yourself from anything related to death, like touching things like diseased skin or dead bodies or even certain bodily fluids. All these make you impure. And becoming ritually impure isn't necessarily sinful. What's wrong is waltzing into God's presence when you're in an impure state. And so that's why God gave the Israelites very clear instructions for knowing when they were impure, steps to become pure, so that they could go into the temple again.
So that's what the book of Leviticus is about.
Right. But it doesn't stop there. This idea keeps developing. So later in the scriptures, we find this really interesting story by a prophet named Isaiah. And he has this crazy vision where he's in the temple and he's right in God's presence. He's totally terrified.
Yeah, he knows the rules. He shouldn't even be in there. And he's worried about being destroyed.
And then this crazy creature called a seraphim.
Yeah, that is a crazy creature.
Totally. So it flies over with a hot coal, and then it sears Isaiah's lips with the coal and says something really weird. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for.
So this burning coal somehow makes Isaiah pure.
Yeah, it's remarkable because normally if you touch something impure, it transfers its impurity to you. But now here's this new idea where you have this coal, this very holy and pure object, and it touches Isaiah, and it transfers its purity to him. Isaiah is not destroyed by God's holiness. He's transformed by it. I mean, the implications of this are just huge. But there's one more development. This time from another prophet, Ezekiel. And he has this vision where he's standing at the temple and he sees water trickling out from it. And then that water turns into a stream, and then it grows into a deep river that starts flowing through the desert, leaving this trail of green trees behind it. And then it flows into the Dead Sea, making everything fresh and alive.
So instead of becoming pure first and then going into the temple, here God's holiness comes out from the temple, making things pure and bringing them to life. What does it all mean?
So we don't know until we meet this man, Jesus. And he claims that he's fulfilling all of these ancient visions, but in surprising new ways. So Jesus, he went around touching people who are impure, people with skin diseases, a woman with chronic bleeding, or dead people. And when he touches them, their impurity should transfer over to Jesus, but instead, Jesus' purity transfers to them and actually heals their bodies.
Jesus is like that holy coal in Isaiah's vision.
Right. And Jesus claimed that he was the human embodiment of God's own holiness, and that he and his followers were now God's temple, so that through them, God's holy presence would go out into the world and bring life and healing and hope. And so this is why Jesus described his followers as having streams of living water flowing out of them.
So this is our part of the story where we find ourselves now, but where's this all heading?
So the last pages of the Bible end with a final vision about God's holiness. And this time it's by a guy named John. And in his vision, we see the whole world made completely new. The entire earth has become God's temple. And Ezekiel's river is there, flowing out of God's presence, immersing all of creation, removing all impurity, and bringing everything back to life.
So there you go. That's the video that I did for the Bible Project, and I worked on some other pieces of other videos as well. But meanwhile, we were putting up our house for sale. The house sold really fast. Suddenly it was like time to move. We packed up, we moved all of our stuff. We drove here to Idaho, put all of our stuff in a storage unit, and then I got this little office here in an old building for $200 a month, set up my computer, and I started working with the Bible Project again to kind of finish some projects with them. Meanwhile, I had already kind of made deals with Webtoons to continue Sithra, and so I knew there was a start date for Sithra, and I told Tim and John, I was like, look, I got to start working on my comic now. I didn't think I would have this opportunity, but I do. And so I stopped working for the Bible Project and started working on Sithra full time, and that's when Webtoons started, and that was 3 years ago now, and I've been working on Sithra ever since. And then I finished Sithra, finished with Webtoons. But anyway, I want to get back to Bible Project because they're doing some really cool things, and I have been so inspired by them over the last couple of years. And I just want to talk about some of the stuff they're doing right now. Just earlier this year, they hit 1 million subscribers on their YouTube channel. 1 million subscribers. And they've done every book of the Bible. They've done tons of themes. They have top-notch animators working for them now. They've increased their studio space 2 or 3 times since the start. They send out these amazing newsletters, print edition newsletters that show the artwork, that talk about all the different facets that go into it, as well as theology and all that stuff. They have this really great podcast too, which I've been listening to. The thing about the Bible Project, John is this mastermind at business and brilliant at running creative businesses. I'm so impressed with him. Tim is the guy who writes and puts together the content with John, but Tim has studied ancient Hebrew language and literature and stuff for years, and he's a professor at some universities. He's led churches. He's studied in Israel. Like, there's so much a wealth of knowledge that Tim has. And it was just such a refreshing approach that Tim has had to understanding the Bible that I haven't seen anywhere else until I started seeing how Tim was approaching it. And the thing that was different about it was he didn't care about the translations. Like, I've always wondered which translation to use, and I've always read different ones and said, well, the best way to get to the root of this is by reading a bunch of different translations. But what's interesting about how Tim and his colleagues work is they learn Hebrew, and then they go straight to the Hebrew sources. And it's just been so incredibly eye-opening for me to hear their approach to how to read the Bible and how to understand it. And it's been amazingly refreshing. The videos themselves are amazing, of course, but the podcasts go into so much deeper stuff. And it's just been so eye-opening and so revealing to me. And it's at multiple points has it made me get more and more excited about studying something new, some new direction in the Bible. that I've never understood before. And I think overall, Tim and John and the Bible Project was a critical component towards me being able to move to Idaho. I really believe that it was one of those mini pieces that God just set up and put right in my lap and made these connections available so that that transition could happen. Anyway, the reason I bring this up right now is because, partially because I want to show you some of this old animation that I was working on. The reason I bring this up now is because their new season of podcasts have just been so inspiring on so many levels, and it has opened my eyes up to so many interesting things and got me reading about different subjects that I never thought I'd read about. If you go to their podcast, the one starting with episode 1, the theme is called God, episode 1, God or Gods. And if you start going through those, oh my goodness, it just is such an interesting ride, and it's opening up this door that I never understood before in the Bible, which is about the spiritual realm. And if you know my books, especially Sithra, you know that I love digging into this unseen world of the spirit world. But the problem is I just didn't feel like there was anything I could really tangible I could grasp biblically that made much sense. There's neat stories in the Bible of things that are obviously in the spiritual realm happening, but I was always confused about it, so I didn't really know how to understand it. But it's interesting because John and Tim have just completely dove into that world in this new season, and it has pointed me in so many interesting directions, and I feel like I am so excited to hear where they're going with this. And I've started buying these other books, which I'll probably share with you guys eventually because I'm just eating them up. And it's just so good. And a new thing that they're announcing too is they're trying to make a college level curriculum classroom. They're calling it Classroom, where he teaches theology at the college level, but it's free online. So they'll have a small group of very diverse-minded people in this class. They'll record it, and then they'll put it out online so that everyone can participate, whether you have the time or money. People want to go to college, but you have to have the time and you have to have the money. And so it's just so exciting what they're doing, and I just wanted to make this video to kind of point you guys to Tim Mackey and to John Collins' Bible Project, because it is like nothing I've seen before. It's such a high production quality with everything that they do, and I'm honored that I was part of it at the very beginning, and I'm honored that I was able to do the Holiness video and a couple other random things that I worked on with them. I just want to say that, please check them out. Check out the Bible Project. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed watching this animation of me making the animation for this video. Please go subscribe to Tim and John's channel, the Bible Project. Please listen to their podcast too. If you like my books, you'll probably really like the direction they're going. And that's all I gotta say. So thanks for listening, you guys. Thank you for checking out my video. My name is Brubaker. I make comic books and graphic novels. You can check them out at Coffee Table Comics. But before we go on, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell too. Give it a thumbs up and watch it all the way to the end 3 times, and then share it on all your favorite social media accounts.